So I was talking about the reality of what we call serving a master or serving a top, and how this is reconciled with what we would call real life. And in my very early experience of this situation, I came across a classic economic setup whereby the submissive was in a completely different social and economic class to his master. Now, we're all familiar with heterosexual relationships. Even if we don't indulge in them, we are really usually aware of how they're constructed. After all, 99.99% of us had heterosexual parents, and we have relatives who are. So we're aware that usually princes don't marry paupers. Happens, but there's usually a lot of steps in between. And it still happens to an extent. There is still a grade or gradient in BDSM, but it can be quite different. What submissives worry about, often before they enter relationships, is how would I square this with my educational, family, or professional background. And in the first few years of my mastership in the 21st century, I came across a case where I was asked to take a submissive from London to North America and to deliver this guy to a master in the United States. Now, this was after 9/11. Security and appearances far were tighter, and everything else was scrutinized, especially entry into the United States. The criteria was that the master in the United States, who'd actually been in a relationship with this submissive for over a year, some years back, required the sub to enter the United States in bondage. Now, I go into that story in a future episode. It was rather surprising how it was affected. But what I am going to discuss is their respective social and financial positions, which were very different and not unusual. In one sense, it was unusual in another, in that the sub was going to be a slave. But that would be that makes it somewhat unusual. But they're, in other words, an intense personal relationship on a more or less daily basis. But how do these two men, the master was, as usual, older than the sub by around 10 years, and the master was a skilled worker. In fact, I think he was a carpenter. So he had his own business in the United States, but it was not what one could call prosperous, but it was self-contained. He did not have a college education, and he was proposing to a submissive who was from a Russell Group University in Britain and was a fairly senior manager in a PR company that the sub come from Britain to the United States and would have a period of initial slavery whereby for some months the sub wouldn't be seen outside of the carpenter's home. Kind of climatization. It's quite extreme, this kind of thing. But, or this particular kind of process, but it can be done. And I was engaged as a kind of middleman to negotiate the process. The sub had a house in London at the time. It was a bad time to sell, and I recommended he rent and so forth, and it was duly done. But this was a gradient between. Normally, this is unusual to, or it would seem to be unusual, certainly in heterosexual life, for a senior lady manager, for instance, to marry, in effect, a carpenter. Okay, an American carpenter, but still a carpenter. This kind of slide is not, it may be in the movies, it may be on television programs, but it's not usually reality. I can't actually tell you how they prospered and how they worked out, but you can now look at the internet, and even on things on fairly family-friendly platforms, you'll find gay couples where the economic disparity is quite large, much larger than you would normally find in heterosexual world. So what it is a series of considered decisions. It's the balance between private life and public life. And that is a balance that we deserve, all of us deserve, to be able to make, and to be able to take that decision in reality, and also, in the end, to revoke it and to go back to, well, the status quo before, or to move on to the next one.